Today, laughter is a sign of relaxation, happiness, even health. But in the Middle Ages, things were very different. Back then, laughter was suspicious. In some cases, it was openly dangerous. Because for medieval people, the world was not a place meant for enjoyment. The world was a process of purification that had to be endured. For this reason, laughter was not seen as an innocent reflex. On the contrary, it was perceived as a loss of control. And in medieval thought, one of the most feared things was this: the loss of authority. That is why laughter was not merely a form of entertainment. It was seen as a force that disrupted order. When people laughed, they were not just having fun. They were cracking authority, fear, and the sacred. And the Middle Ages were not a time that tolerated cracks. Because in medieval Europe, life was God-centered. The world was temporary. The body was suspect. Pleasure and sensations were considered dangerous. Laughter touched all of these areas at once. Laughter was tied to the body. When a person laughed, the face twisted, sounds escaped, the body shook. For many clerics, this meant one thing: the soul surrendering to the body. This was seen as a lack of control. In a dark age like the Middle Ages, such behavior was unacceptable. Monastic rules explicitly forbade loud laughter. Even a quiet smile could sometimes arouse suspicion. For the Church, the world was a serious testing ground. Suffering was valued. Endurance was a virtue. Fear was seen as a sign of being on the right path. Laughter, however, was dangerous, because a person who laughs does not fear. A person who does not fear questions. And a person who questions does not obey. Pause for a moment and imagine this: being punished for laughing in the wrong place. Not being scolded, but being seen as suspicious. Even being considered sinful. In the Middle Ages, laughter was exactly that. Not an innocent reflex, but a dangerous behavior. Because for medieval people, the world was not a place to settle into and enjoy. Life was a waiting period that had to be endured before standing in the presence of God. True life would begin after death. This worldview fundamentally changed the meaning given to everyday emotions. Suffering was not considered negative. On the contrary, it was seen as a tool that purified sin. Every hardship was believed to serve the cleansing of the soul. Joy, however, was not welcomed, because joy implied satisfaction with this world, and laughter was the most visible expression of that satisfaction. Someone who laughed was unknowingly saying, "I am fine in this world. I take pleasure here." But if this world was a testing ground, why were people comfortable and happy in it? At this point, laughter ceased to be a simple emotional reaction. Laughter meant temporarily suspending the weight of the world, the seriousness of death and divine judgment. And according to the medieval mindset, this was dangerous, because it loosened the soul, distracted attention, and pulled people away from their ultimate purpose. For this reason, laughter was not perceived as innocent joy, but as a potential threat, something that disrupted spiritual discipline and severed people from their awareness of life as a test. For medieval people, the issue was not laughter itself, but what laughter represented: not taking this world seriously enough. And that was unacceptable. There was another point that reinforced this way of thinking. For medieval theologians, the Bible was a sacred text that required understanding not only what was written, but also what was left unwritten. Jesus is explicitly described as weeping. His tears, especially in response to the death of Lazarus, are emphasized. This was seen as a powerful sign that sorrow and compassion were sacred. But there is not a single line stating that Jesus laughed. This silence was not seen as a lack, but as a deliberate sign. Jesus was accepted as the flawless model of the human closest to God. If laughter did not exist in this model, then laughter must have been either unnecessary or spiritually dangerous. Because Jesus' presence on earth was not about pleasure, but about suffering, sacrifice, and the salvation of humanity. Laughter was therefore seen as a lightness that did not fit this heavy mission. For this reason, laughter gradually became, in the eyes of the clergy, a worldly behavior. Spiritual depth was sought in silence, contemplation, and patience. Laughter, on the other hand, was judged as a sudden reaction that drew attention to the body and disrupted focus. In medieval theology, it was believed that the devil first drew humans away from seriousness. Laughter was therefore considered the first step in that process. What was feared was not laughter itself, but the spiritual relaxation that followed it. But the matter did not end there. In the Middle Ages, laughter was not only a moral or religious issue, it was also a political one, because laughter weakened fear. Where fear weakened, obedience loosened. Where obedience loosened, questioning began. An order stands with its king, its church, and its laws. The primary fuel of this order is seriousness. When seriousness breaks down, authority becomes ordinary. Mockery does exactly this. It makes a king ridiculous. It strips a priest of untouchability. It makes laws debatable. That is why in the Middle Ages, a joke made in the wrong place was never considered innocent. Those who mocked authority were seen not only as rude, but as dangerous. Depending on the context, humor could be equated with heresy, because laughter did not reveal the strength of order, but its fragility. And no power tolerates a laugh that shows exactly where it can crack. Yet the irony appears precisely here. It is often assumed that medieval people did not laugh, but in reality, they laughed a great deal. What was strictly controlled was when and where they were allowed to laugh. Joy suppressed in everyday life burst out uncontrollably at certain moments. At fairs and public festivities, this repression was temporarily suspended. In these spaces, obscene jokes were told, lewd stories were shared, and priests and kings were mocked. Carnivals were the most extreme example of this. During these days, roles were deliberately reversed. Peasants acted like kings, authority figures were ridiculed. But this inversion was not a revolution. On the contrary, it functioned as a release mechanism necessary for the continuation of order. People were allowed, for a short time, to experience the emotions they were normally forced to suppress. That is why laughter was never completely banned. It was scheduled, restricted. Because like every suppressed emotion, joy becomes explosive when left uncontrolled. Medieval societies understood this intuitively. The more you suppress something, the more powerfully it returns. This temporary freedom was a controlled pause designed to prevent the system from cracking. In the end, laughter was dangerous in the Middle Ages because it liberated the body, reduced fear, encouraged questioning of the sacred, suspended rational restraint, made authority ordinary. In other words, laughter was a silent rebellion. Perhaps that is why the most feared thing in history was not a loud uprising, but a laugh uttered at the wrong time by the wrong person. And perhaps the real question was this: did people lose control when they laughed? Or was it at that moment that control was finally revealed? Because a laugh is not just a sound. It is everything a person has suppressed, risen to the surface for a brief moment. In that instant, when fear, obedience, and habit are suspended, a person might ask themselves, "If I can laugh, why am I afraid?" Perhaps what truly frightened the Middle Ages was not laughter itself, but the possibility it opened. The possibility that order was not inevitable, that fear was not indispensable, that what was considered sacred could be shaken. That is why a single laugh at the wrong moment was more dangerous than thousands of words. Because sometimes what destroys a system is not a loud rebellion, but a person beginning to laugh quietly on their own.